The restaurant buzzed with life, clinking silverware, soft music, and the low hum of conversations that filled every corner like smoke. In the middle of it all, at a quiet corner table with a view of nothing but the rain-slicked sidewalk, sat a man whose name echoed in boardrooms and Forbes articles, Elijah Caldwell, billionaire CEO of Caldwell Enterprises. He wasn't wearing a tailored smile tonight. There was no entourage, no assistant whispering schedules, no press following his every move. Just him, a barely touched plate of food, and a silence so heavy it seemed to press down on the tablecloth. Outside, people hurried past, umbrellas swaying, unaware that a man who once commanded stadiums was shrinking into shadows over a glass of untouched wine. Grief does that. It shrinks giants. No one knew that today marked 10 years since he buried his daughter. He came here every year on this date. Not for the food, not for the view, but because it was the last place she smiled. He wasn't looking for comfort, which is why he didn't notice the small figure watching him from a few tables over. A little girl, maybe 6 or 7, in a coat too big for her shoulders and eyes too wide for someone so young. She tugged her mother's sleeve and whispered that the man looked like he needed a hug. Her mother shook her head gently and told her that sometimes people just need space. But the girl didn't believe that. She believed in action. Quietly, she slipped out of her seat, tiptoed toward the man's table, and did something no one in Elijah's world had done in years. She saw him. And with a broken crayon from her pocket and a trembling hand, she scribbled something onto his napkin. Then, like a feather in the wind, she was gone. Elijah didn't notice until he reached for his drink and unfolded the cloth. The words were crooked, simple, and spelled with the innocence of someone who hadn't learned how cruel the world could be. But they hit harder than any investor's betrayal, deeper than any market crash. I saw you were sad. My mommy says people who cry just need someone to notice. And just like that, the tears came. For the first time in years, Elijah Caldwell cried. Not because he was broken, but because a child reminded him he was still human. The clinking of cutlery and murmured conversations floated through the plush atmosphere of Le Jardin Noir, Manhattan's most exclusive fine dining experience. Candlelight flickered against the crystal glasses, and a violinist played a soft sonata in the corner. Waiters in starched uniforms moved like synchronized dancers, attending to an audience of wealth and status. At table 9, Elijah Cross sat alone. He was a man who commanded the world's attention, yet at this moment, he seemed to disappear into the shadows of the dim restaurant lighting. The billionaire CEO of Crosstech Global, Elijah had closed a $2.4 billion acquisition that morning. By nightfall, every business outlet had hailed him as a visionary, a dealmaker, a titan. But Elijah felt nothing. He sipped his aged red wine with practiced indifference, staring through the glass as if hoping to find a reason for the hollowness inside. His phone vibrated with a message from his assistant congratulating him again and mentioning how thrilled the board was. He turned the phone face down. The waiter approached and placed a perfectly arranged steak tartare in front of him, describing it as the chef's special, truffle-infused with imported Wagyu. Elijah nodded politely and thanked him. The waiter disappeared, leaving Elijah alone with his meal and his thoughts. He glanced at the seat across from him. It had been years since anyone sat there. His wife used to sit there before she left. His daughter used to sit there before fate stole her away. It was Christmas Eve, 5 years ago. A drunk driver. A shattered windshield. A tiny pink shoe on the asphalt. The steak tartare remained untouched. Meanwhile, across the street, hidden behind a lamppost and half covered by an oversized hoodie, a little girl watched through the restaurant window. Her name was Lily. She was 9 years old and hungry. Lily's stomach growled as she pressed her nose against the cold glass. Her breath fogged up the window as she watched diners eat things she couldn't even pronounce. Her mother had fallen ill again, and there was no dinner at home, not that there usually was. Their electricity had been cut 2 weeks ago. Her mom said it would be fixed soon, but Lily had stopped believing in soon. The fancy man at table 9 caught her eye. He looked sad, even though he had everything. a shiny watch, a neat suit, food on the table. But his eyes looked the way her mother's did when she thought Lily wasn't looking. She had an idea. Slipping through the side entrance while a delivery driver held the door, Lily tiptoed past the kitchen toward the main floor. She moved like a ghost, small, quiet, invisible. The servers were too busy to notice her. She crept up to table 9 while Elijah stared out the window, lost in memory. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of restaurant napkin she had swiped from a busboy's cart. Her hands trembled slightly as she used a borrowed pen she had picked off the sidewalk earlier that day. She wrote quickly, a sentence, short and sharp. Then she placed the napkin carefully next to Elijah's untouched plate and slipped away. Seconds later, Elijah blinked and looked down. The napkin hadn't been there before. He frowned slightly, picking it up. In shaky, childish handwriting, it read that he should not forget his daughter would have been her age and that she too was hungry. His heart stopped. The violinist's melody became a distant hum as the words burned into his soul. His hand trembled. He reread it, as though hoping he'd misunderstood. But there it was, his daughter, her memory, her age, 9. Elijah's throat tightened, and something unfamiliar surged in his chest. It wasn't anger, it wasn't confusion, it was sorrow, raw and visceral. He clenched the napkin as if trying to draw life from its fabric. Tears filled his eyes, threatening to fall. He hadn't cried since the funeral. Not when his marriage fell apart. Not when Crosstech went public. Not even when he found himself waking up alone in a penthouse filled with everything except joy. But now a napkin had undone him. He leaned back in his chair, blinking rapidly as a tear traced down his cheek. A nearby diner noticed and paused mid-conversation. The violinist's bow faltered for a moment. Even Marcus, the waiter, looked unsure whether to approach. Elijah composed himself enough to softly ask who brought the napkin. Marcus looked puzzled and asked if he meant a guest's child. Elijah clarified that it wasn't a guest. She slipped in. She must have come from outside. Marcus said he would ask the staff, but Elijah stopped him and said he would find her himself. Without another word, he left the restaurant. Outside, the winter wind bit into his skin, but he didn't care. He scanned the sidewalk, the alley, the passing cars. He showed the napkin to a homeless man near the corner and asked if he had seen a little girl, about 9, in a hoodie with brown hair. The man squinted, then pointed toward 43rd Street and said he saw one heading that way, looking like she was shivering. Elijah nodded and took off in that direction. Blocks passed. He walked faster, heart racing. What was he even going to say if he found her? Why did he care so much? Because, for the first time in 5 years, someone had reached into his darkness and lit a spark. Not for money, not for fame. Just a child, speaking from one wounded heart to another. He had to find her, had to know who she was, and why her words had broken something and healed something all at once. Elijah's Italian leather shoes weren't made for running, but he didn't stop to care. He scanned every alleyway, stoop, and doorway along 43rd Street. The cold gnawed at his fingers. His breath came in short bursts, but the napkin remained clutched in his hand like a map to something sacred. He finally paused at a corner bodega, eyes drawn to the glow of a vending machine outside. A child-sized figure crouched beside it. The hoodie was oversized, the jeans frayed at the hem, but the moment he saw her, he knew. "Hey," he called out, breathless. The girl flinched and stood up like a deer ready to bolt. Her eyes met his, sharp, wary, and prepared for disappointment. "I'm not going to hurt you," Elijah said gently, raising his hands. "You left this for me, didn't you?" He held out the napkin. The girl stared at it, then at him, then down at her sneakers. "Why?" he asked, stepping closer. "Why did you write this?" She hugged herself. "I saw you sitting alone. You looked sad." Elijah knelt slightly to meet her eye level, ignoring the cold seeping into his knees. "I was." She sniffled. "You looked like my mom, when she stares at the window like she's watching someone who ain't coming back." He nodded slowly. You were right. My daughter. She passed away a few years ago. She would have been 9 this year. Lily looked down, her voice barely a whisper. I'm sorry. You reminded me of her, Elijah said. That's why I cried. He took a moment to really look at the girl. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, a bruise was forming on her wrist, and her hoodie, 3 sizes too big, was torn at the sleeves. Yet her eyes were vibrant, alive with courage that few adults carried. What's your name? He asked. Lily. Do you live nearby? She hesitated. With my mom. She's sick. We used to have a place. Now we stay where we can. Have you eaten? She shook her head, biting her lip. Elijah stood and offered his hand. Come with me. Lily flinched. Where? To eat. That's all. She studied his eyes, uncertain. But hunger was stronger than fear, and something in his gaze told her this man wasn't like the others who walked past pretending not to see. She reached out and took his hand. Back at the restaurant, the staff did double takes as Elijah Cross returned, with a small, disheveled girl in tow. Marcus rushed over, confused and concerned. Sir, is everything all right? I'd like a private table, Elijah said firmly, and 2 of everything she wants. Lily looked up at him, wide-eyed. Really? Really? He smiled. They were led to a booth in the back. A blanket was brought for Lily's shoulders. Hot chocolate appeared. Then soup. Then rolls. Then spaghetti piled high with meatballs the size of tennis balls. Elijah watched her eat with a hunger that wasn't just physical. It was as if life itself had been withheld, and now she was reclaiming it 1 bite at a time. You said your mom's sick? He asked gently as she slowed down. Lily nodded between mouthfuls. She can't get up much anymore. Some days she can't breathe right. I try to help. I clean houses with her when she's able. Do you go to school? Not really. We move too much. Elijah's chest tightened. Where are you staying now? There's an old basement in a shut-down laundromat. The owner lets us sleep there sometimes. He clenched his jaw. This wasn't just poverty. This was survival. After dinner, Elijah ordered a car, not the limo, but something simple so Lily wouldn't feel intimidated. On the ride, she grew drowsy. He asked her for directions, and eventually, they pulled up to the back of a dark, crumbling building. Inside, the air was musty. A single kerosene lamp lit the basement. On a cot lay a woman, gaunt and pale, coughing violently. Her eyes fluttered open as they entered. Lily? The woman croaked. It's okay, Mama. He's nice. He brought food. The woman squinted. Who? Elijah Cross, he said softly. I met your daughter tonight. She saved my life more than she knows. The woman tried to sit up but fell back. She didn't bother you, did she? I told her not to ask people. She didn't bother me. She helped me remember something I'd forgotten. He stepped forward and knelt beside her. You need a doctor. We can't afford. You don't have to. I'll take care of it. Her lip quivered. Why? He held up the napkin. Because of this. Tears welled in her eyes. That was her? He nodded. The next morning, Elijah had his private doctor examine Lily's mother, whose name was Teresa. Diagnosis: severe pneumonia, complicated by untreated asthma and exhaustion. He arranged immediate hospital care, full treatment, and a warm hotel suite for Lily that same night, complete with room service and a clean bed. He sat with Lily after the doctors had taken her mom. You have a brave heart, he said. You took care of your mom when no one else would. I just didn't want her to die. Elijah's voice caught. I know that feeling. They sat in silence, a quiet bond forming in the stillness. I miss my daughter every day, he said. I never got to say goodbye. Lily reached into her hoodie pocket and pulled out the napkin again. Can I keep this, since it made you remember her? He smiled. You can keep it. Or better yet, we can frame it. Really? Yes. to remind us both what one little message can do. Back at his penthouse, Elijah stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, city lights stretching endlessly beyond. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was looking at the world from behind glass. He had lived for years building empires, chasing legacy. But tonight a child gave him a purpose greater than power. And her name was Lily. The following week passed in a whirl of hospital visits, legal consultations, and more shared dinners than Elijah had experienced in years. Teresa, now under professional care, was slowly regaining strength, her lungs no longer wheezing with every breath. Lily stayed in the hotel suite Elijah arranged for them, where soft pillows and hot showers became new treasures. But just as quickly as they had entered his life, they disappeared. It started with a phone call. Elijah had stepped away for a board meeting when his assistant, Kim, answered the call from the hospital. She told him they had both left early that morning, without any discharge paperwork. They just vanished. Panic gripped him. They must have gone through the back, she explained. Nurses said Lily left a note at the reception desk. Elijah took the crayon-scribbled note with shaking hands. It was simple, written on a hotel notepad. Lily had written that they didn't belong in his world, and asked him not to come looking. His heart sank. Kim added that they left everything, the new clothes, the gifts, even the framed napkin, the napkin that had changed both their lives. Elijah muttered that Lily was scared. She thought he was just another person who would use her or take her from her mom. He sat down heavily, the weight of helplessness crushing him. For a man who could make nations shift with a phone call, it was agonizing to realize he couldn't find one small girl who had touched his soul. But he wouldn't give up. Elijah launched a discreet search, not through the police. He didn't want to frighten them. Instead, he hired a small team of private investigators with a single mission: find Lily and Teresa, make sure they were safe, and deliver a message. You are wanted. He also began making public appearances with a new purpose. In interviews, he spoke about homelessness, about forgotten children, and about the girl who had changed his life. He said he was lost in grief, and a stranger's kindness reminded him that love doesn't disappear. It just waits for someone to awaken it. He never mentioned names or gave personal details, but his words spread. They echoed across social media, lighting sparks in communities that had long felt ignored. Meanwhile, in a quiet corner of Brooklyn, Lily and Teresa took shelter in an abandoned church. It was warmer than the laundromat, and the pastor, an aging man named Father Cole, let them sleep in the back pews and use the soup kitchen when volunteers weren't around. Teresa hated leaving the hospital without notice, but fear had gripped her. She feared someone would take Lily away, that the billionaire's kindness came with hidden strings. Lily, hugging her knees one night, said maybe he was nice. Teresa whispered maybe, but insisted rich people didn't give without wanting something back. Lily didn't respond. She thought of Elijah's eyes, how they looked when he told her about his daughter. That wasn't a man playing a game. That was someone who hurt the way she did. But still, she obeyed. They kept moving, never staying anywhere more than a week. And yet, the memory of Elijah's warmth lingered. Elijah's search stretched into months. Spring arrived, painting the city with cherry blossoms and hope. And then, finally, a lead. One of his investigators called late at night to tell him they had found them at St. Mary's in Brooklyn. Elijah didn't hesitate. He told them not to approach, just to give him the address. It was raining when he arrived. Not a dramatic storm, but a soft drizzle that wrapped the city in silver mist. The church loomed quietly, its stained glass windows dulled by grime. He entered through the side and found the sanctuary empty, except for a few scattered candles. He heard soft laughter. Following the sound, he reached a side hall. There, sitting on the floor with a coloring book in her lap, was Lily. She looked up, and their eyes locked. Time froze. Then she stood slowly, unsure, as if he might vanish if she blinked too hard. She told him she was afraid he wouldn't come. He said he promised he would. She mentioned she left the napkin. It didn't feel like hers anymore. He needed it more. He knelt and told her he never wanted anything from her. He just wanted to help. She and her mom deserved more than scraps. They deserved a home, school, safety. She hesitated, saying her mom was scared. He nodded, saying she had every right to be, but he wouldn't force anything. He just wanted them to know he cared. Tears welled in her eyes. She asked if he still wanted them. Elijah reached out gently and said more than anything. That evening, they sat together with Father Cole in the old chapel. Teresa entered slowly, frail but standing. Elijah stood and told her he wouldn't pressure her. But he wanted to offer something freely, with no expectations. Teresa nodded warily. He said he would give them a home, not a hotel, a real home, with no rent, no debt, just theirs. He'd arrange school for Lily, and a job for Teresa if she wanted, part-time, remote, whatever worked. Teresa's eyes shimmered with emotion. She asked why. Why do all this? Elijah said Lily reminded him what love looked like, and he thought maybe they were meant to help each other heal. A silence followed. Then Teresa crossed the room and hugged him, not out of desperation, but gratitude. She whispered, "Okay." The next day, Elijah took them to a house in Queens. It was modest by Billionaire standards, a cozy 2-bedroom with a garden and blue shutters. But to Lily, it was a palace. She ran through the rooms, touching the walls like they were made of magic. Teresa stood in the doorway, hand over her mouth, unable to speak. Elijah smiled, his heart full. Welcome home. The first morning in their new house was unlike anything Lily had ever experienced. No shouts from a nearby alley, no rats scurrying through shadows, no chill biting through the torn seams of an old jacket. Just silence. Soft golden silence broken only by birds chirping outside the window and the distant hum of early traffic. For the first time in her young life, Lily awoke in a bed, a real bed, with warm blankets that smelled like lavender and sunshine. She sat up slowly, almost afraid she would wake up back in the church pew. But the painted ceiling above her, the pink curtains, and the tiny bookshelf stacked with fairy tales told her this was real. She smiled. Downstairs, Teresa stood barefoot in the kitchen, staring at the gleaming stovetop as though it were a spaceship. Elijah had stocked the fridge the night before and left them alone, respecting their need for space. There were eggs, fresh milk, even strawberries. Teresa whispered if they were dreaming when Lily padded into the kitchen. Lily replied that if they were, she didn't want to wake up. Later that week, Elijah returned with a backpack and a surprise. He asked Lily if she was ready for school as she swung in the backyard. Her eyes widened and she asked if she could really go to real school. He nodded and said it was a good one, private, safe, and with caring teachers. They had already reviewed her placement test, and she was a year ahead in reading. Lily beamed and said she read a lot in the laundromat because stories made her forget the cold. He told her she'd write her own stories one day. Turning to Teresa, he added that there was a part-time admin role at his foundation, with flexible hours, remote, and full benefits, and it was hers if she wanted it. Teresa said he didn't have to keep helping them. He responded that he knew, but he wanted to. Her lips trembled as she thanked him for not giving up. The days turned into weeks and the little house became a home. Lily made friends at school. Her teacher once called Elijah to say she'd written an essay titled "The Man with the Napkin," and it had moved the entire class to tears. The teacher said she was something special and told Elijah not to stop whatever he was doing. Elijah didn't plan to. He became part of their lives, not intrusively, but steadily. He joined them for dinner on Sundays, bringing homemade lasagna or cupcakes from his favorite bakery. They planted tomatoes in the garden, watched movies on rainy nights, and shared laughter that healed old wounds. Sometimes, when Lily sat on the couch with her head on Elijah's shoulder, he could almost hear his daughter's giggle echo in the room. It didn't hurt anymore. It warmed him. But not everyone understood. During a board meeting at the company, his CFO leaned in with a smirk and commented that Elijah had been busy, with rumors saying he had taken in a stray. Elijah's eyes narrowed and he asked if the man meant a child, and her sick mother. The CFO said he meant that Elijah was running a charity out of his wallet, noting that his donations were up 200% that quarter, and claiming it wasn't sustainable. Elijah replied coldly that he wasn't there to sustain numbers, but to sustain lives. The boardroom fell silent. Elijah added that if that was a problem, he'd happily take his billions elsewhere. Nobody objected. One Friday afternoon, while walking Lily home from school, Elijah noticed her quietness. He asked what was on her mind. She kicked a stone down the sidewalk and said there was a father-daughter dance next week. He responded with curiosity. She quietly said she didn't have a dad. Elijah's chest tightened. She stopped and looked up at him, saying she was thinking maybe he could come. His throat closed, but he nodded and said he'd be honored. The night of the dance, Lily wore a pale lavender dress and a matching ribbon in her hair. Teresa teared up as she fastened it, whispering that Lily looked like a dream. Elijah arrived in a charcoal gray suit, holding a tiny corsage. He handed it to Lily and pinned it to her wrist, asking if she was ready to show him her moves. She laughed and told him only if he didn't step on her toes. The gymnasium shimmered with fairy lights. Other dads twirled daughters. Laughter echoed. Elijah stood awkwardly at first, but Lily tugged him onto the floor. They danced. She led. He followed. And in that moment, everything, the past, the grief, the boardrooms, the billion-dollar deals, melted away. He was just a man dancing with the little girl who saved him. That night, Lily curled on the couch with Teresa. She whispered that he didn't cry this time. Teresa asked what she meant. Lily said that at the restaurant, when she gave him the napkin, he cried. Teresa smiled gently and said he didn't cry anymore because Lily gave him a reason to smile. Lily asked if he'd always be around. Teresa hesitated, then nodded and said she thought he'd always be her family. Sometimes the best families weren't the ones you were born into, she said. They were the ones who choose you. Meanwhile, Elijah sat in his penthouse looking out at the skyline. A photo sat on his desk now. Lily, beaming in her purple dress, hand in his. Next to it, the old napkin, framed again, but this time with a new note beneath it in Lily's handwriting. You gave us a home. But first we gave you a heart. Thank you for choosing us. Elijah smiled. For the first time in years, he felt complete. It had been 1 year. 1 year since a napkin scribble in a crowded restaurant turned Elijah Caldwell's world upside down. 1 year since Lily and Teresa entered his life, like a soft breeze cracking open tightly sealed windows of grief. 1 year since he cried for the first time in a decade, because a little girl reminded him what hearts were for. Today the air was different, warm, hopeful. The spring gala for the Caldwell Foundation for Families was in full swing, held in the grand ballroom of the downtown Civic Center. A year ago, the idea hadn't existed. Now it was the city's most anticipated charity event, bringing together business leaders, city officials, and philanthropists to raise funds for housing and education programs for struggling single-parent families. But the highlight of the evening wasn't the opulent chandeliers, the live orchestra, or the 5-course meal. It was the story of how it all began. Elijah stood backstage, adjusting his tie in front of a mirror. His assistant, Julia, handed him a sheet of notes, but he waved it away. He said he wouldn't need them. This one's from the heart, he added. Julia asked if he was sure he wanted to do this. He looked toward the curtain, where the soft chatter of guests could be heard. It's time, he said. When he stepped onto the stage, the room fell silent. He looked out into a sea of faces. Near the front, Lily sat next to Teresa, beaming with pride in a powder blue dress. Her feet didn't quite touch the floor, but her presence filled the room like sunlight through stained glass. Elijah took a breath and began. A little over a year ago, he was a man with more wealth than he could spend, and less peace than he could bear. He sat in a restaurant alone, grieving a daughter he'd lost and a life that had lost its meaning. That night, a girl he'd never met left a note on his napkin. It read, "I saw you were sad. My mommy says people who cry just need someone to notice." A soft murmur rippled through the audience. "She noticed me," he continued. "Her name is Lily. She was homeless, hungry, brave." He looked at her. Lily gave him something he didn't know he needed, a chance to feel again, and in turn, he had the privilege of giving her and her mother something they needed, a home. He gestured toward a screen behind him. A slideshow began, images of Lily drawing at her new desk, Teresa in her home office, other families moving into tiny homes built by the foundation. Tonight, he said, they celebrated more than just generosity. They celebrated the courage of a little girl who changed everything. Because of her, over 300 families had found housing. Dozens of parents now had stable jobs, and children who once did homework by candlelight now studied under real roofs, with full bellies and fuller hearts. Applause swelled. Eyes glistened. And Elijah, for once, didn't blink away his tears. After the speech, guests flocked to donate. Checks were signed, hands were shaken. But Elijah made his way straight to Lily and Teresa. Teresa whispered that he did amazing and hugged him tightly. He smiled and said he had a great muse. Lily tugged his sleeve and asked if he saw everyone clapping. He said he sure did. She asked if they clapped because she gave him the napkin. He knelt to her level and said he thought they clapped because she reminded everyone that kindness is contagious, that even the smallest hand can reach the deepest place in someone's heart. Lily threw her arms around his neck. She said she loved him. He hugged her back and told her he loved her too. That night, back at their house, Lily asked if she could stay up a little longer. "There's something I want to write," she said. She sat at her desk and pulled out a sheet of paper. "Dear future me, don't forget what a napkin can do. Don't forget that even sad people need someone to notice, and don't forget to pass it on. Love, Lily." She folded it neatly and placed it in her box of treasures, beside the first key to their home, a picture of her mom laughing, and a leaf she'd picked up the day she and Elijah planted tomatoes. 2 weeks later, Elijah made an unexpected announcement. He told Teresa he wanted to adopt Lily. She froze and asked if he meant legally. He nodded and said he'd never try to replace her father or take her away, but he wanted to make sure she was protected, loved, forever. Teresa's eyes brimmed with tears. She said he already did that, but yes, if Lily wanted it, so did she. When they asked Lily, she didn't speak at first. She just ran to her room. Seconds later, she returned with the napkin, the original one, the one she had scribbled at the restaurant. She said she wanted it to be in the courtroom, because this was where they became family. Months later, the judge's gavel echoed in the quiet chamber. By the powers granted to her by the state, she recognized Elijah Thomas Caldwell as the legal adoptive parent of Lily Maria Hart. Elijah smiled. Lily jumped into his arms. Outside, photographers from local papers snapped photos of the billionaire and the little girl in matching gray jackets. But Elijah didn't care about headlines anymore. All that mattered was that she was his now, in every way that counted. And he was hers. 1 year and 1 napkin later, the restaurant where it all began added a framed piece to their wall of fame. It wasn't a celebrity portrait, it was a child's handwriting on a crumpled napkin. "I saw you were sad. My mommy says people who cry just need someone to notice." Underneath, a brass plaque read, "Because someone noticed, lives changed forever." And every so often, a server would spot a young girl at table 5 scribbling on a napkin, just in case someone else looked a little too sad to eat alone. Because Lily never forgot what it felt like to be cold, unseen, and hungry for more than food. And she would never let anyone else feel that way, not if she could help it. 5 years later, the napkin, aged, creased, and fragile, sat in a glass frame on Elijah Caldwell's office wall, right above his desk. Its childish scrawl had faded slightly, but the words remained as powerful as the first day he read them. I saw you were sad. My mommy says people who cry just need someone to notice. Visitors to his office often paused in front of it. Some smiled, some teared up, some asked if it was real. He always answered the same way. It saved my life. Outside his office window stood the headquarters of the Caldwell Foundation, a building that didn't exist until one small hand wrote with one broken crayon. That napkin had sparked not just a moment of emotion, but a legacy of compassion. Across the country, tiny homes with brightly painted doors were filled with laughter. Single mothers no longer chose between dinner and diapers. Children once sleeping in cars now dreamed beneath bunk beds and ceiling stars. And Lily? She was 10 now, spirited, brilliant, unapologetically kind. She sat beside Elijah most days after school, sometimes doing homework, sometimes helping him stuff envelopes for donors, and sometimes doodling new napkin notes for strangers. Her latest project was called Kindness Napkins. Thousands were being distributed in restaurants, shelters, and hospitals, with short handwritten notes that read, "You're not invisible. You matter more than you know." I noticed. She said it was her way of passing it on. Teresa, now the director of community partnerships for the foundation, smiled every time she saw Lily and Elijah together. Father and daughter not by blood, but by choice. The kind of love built not through perfection, but through the powerful grace of noticing. And every year, on the anniversary of the napkin, they returned to the same restaurant. They didn't do it for publicity. They did it for a quiet moment at table 5, where Elijah always ordered the same meal, and Lily always left behind a napkin. Just in case someone else was sad, just in case someone else needed to be noticed.